Igama lami nginguNobuhle wakwaHlongwa. I'm the Deputy Chairperson for the Local Organizing Committee, the Dean and the Head of School of Arts at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, and your Treasurer for ALASA. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not going to be the one to open and welcome you this morning in our 25th ALASA International Conference this morning. I would like to welcome you, colleagues, and welcome Professor Nhlanhla Mkhize, who is our Deputy Vice Chancellor and the Head of Humanities College, to come and welcome you. You will see in your programs, colleagues, we do have the short bio there for Prof. Mkhize, but to be brief, Prof. Mkhize is currently our DVC and Head of Humanities College. He is the former Head of School of Psychology and also the former Dean and the former Head of the School of Applied Human Sciences at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. As much as he is a DVC, but like Prof is still teaching, so he teaches modules on African psychology and ethics with reference to African philosophical underpinnings to ethics and also touching on the interface between culture, health, and illness. He has been invited to give keynote addresses nationally and internationally on the subject of indigenous knowledge systems, morality, ethics, and the self. Prof. Mkhize has published journal articles and book chapters on cultural aspect of counseling, career counseling, African psychology, and ethics. He was a member of the International African Reference Group that participated in the revision of the International Code of Ethics for Occupational Health Therapists. Of late, he has been interested in language and instruction and has been involved in isiZulu terminology development and translation for psychology and other social sciences disciplines. Kabazela. We welcome you. Please officially welcome us as we open the ALASA conference. A big round of applause for Prof. Mkhize. Thank you.
Molweni sanibonani manene namanenekazi. Goeiemôre heren en dames. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Ujambo abarigani. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'm trying to be as inclusive as possible because you are in South Africa, Africa Burwa, Mzansi Africa, and as you know, we have got a long history of being inclusive in this country, but inclusivity by and large is an African value system. We always sit in a circle when we are engaging to emphasize the value of inclusivity and doing things together. Say together, we are one. Simunye, we can achieve a lot working in the spirit of Shosholoza. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is my singular honor to welcome you to the 25th Biennial International Conference of ALASA on behalf of the executive of the University of KwaZulu-Natal, particularly our Vice Chancellor and Principal, Professor Nana Boko. I welcome in a special way the chairperson of ALASA, Dr. Malete Sagwamugela. We welcome our keynote speakers. There are a number of them. Professor Pamela Maseko. And I must say, we have a long history of working together on various projects with Professor Maseko, particularly in the National Institute of the Humanities and Social Sciences. We welcome also Professor Lekete Makalela of Wits University. And I welcome in a very, very special way somebody who has traveled quite a lot to be here. And I'm very pleased also that we have visited her institution, Professor Shani Omari Mchepange of the University of Dar es Salaam, where she is the director of the Kiswahili Institute. And I must also mention, by the way, that here at the University of KwaZulu-Natal and also with some sister partners, we are working on initiatives to develop and strengthen the teaching of Kiswahili on the southern continent. Kiswahili being one of the largest languages globally. And in my view, it is an injustice that on the continent we don't have a language that binds us together. And in my view, Kiswahili could be one of those languages. Welcome, Professor Shani. We also have other keynote speakers, although she is not here, Professor Shuma from Beijing Foreign Studies University in China. We welcome you. She may be listening online. And also, I would like to welcome Dr. Hlonipani Ndebele, who's also our keynote speaker for this event. Welcome, Dr. Ndebele, and welcome back to the University of KwaZulu-Natal. I know we are here at Mhlanga, but he's a product of the University of KwaZulu-Natal, so okay, there's no harm in mentioning these things. Okay. We also have several partners. I'm going to touch on a few of them. Ngizothatha amabalengwe nje lapha nalapha amagqabantshintshi lapha nalapha yabo ngibambe ngiyeka ngoba we have got several partners, but our key partners here, I do want to welcome Mr. Lance Schultz, who's also here with us today, the CEO of PanSALB. Thank you very much for the support. Welcoming also Dr. Cynthia Kumalo from the National Department of Sports, Arts and Culture, as well as Dr. Masia Sotigo, the Deputy Director General of the Department of Higher Education. And I do need to emphasize, in fact, that the Department of Higher Education has played a major role here in the country towards the development of African languages through several grants to the local institutions, as well as the catalytic projects that have been given to the various groups. Our sponsors, our key sponsors, we want to express our appreciation to the following sponsors, Via Africa, Shooter and Shooter, as well as Sadila. I don't know if Professor Kumalo is here already. Our sincerest appreciation to all of you for making these events happen. We have several other sponsors as well who have contributed, and they are all listed in our program. We also want to welcome them. Before I sit down, I would just like to say a couple of words to emphasize the importance of African languages, and for the purposes of learning, for the purposes of commerce, for the purposes of social cohesion, as well as the promotion of social justice, more so in the digital age. The digital age is presenting us with many challenges, And if we are not able to capture our knowledges in this day and era, it is highly likely that in the future the languages may disappear altogether with all the knowledge that has been accumulated over thousands and thousands of years. But what is also most important is for us, especially as an old continent, but at the same time a young continent. I believe that you can understand where I'm coming from. We are an old continent, a continent that gave birth to humanity, where the mother tongue was first spoken, and I think it is a travesty of justice that there is no major international language that we can say this is what distinguishes us as a continent, and that is why I was singling out Kiswahili and several others that we can develop for that purpose. We do want to highlight that monolingualism is in fact a challenge. It is a challenge in the sense that it impedes social cohesion, but also it impedes the development of what we call higher mental functions or thinking processes. And multilingualism develops your ability to think in a complex manner, but also to recognize and appraise the perspectives of others from different angles. So we are very keen, and especially in the digital age, that we have come together from all the corners of the world to deliberate on this special topic. And on behalf of the University of KwaZulu-Natal, on behalf of the Republic of South Africa and the continent at large, we welcome you all, and we are looking forward to several recommendations that will come out of this engagement. Now is the time to act. Now is the time to implement. But at the same time, we must assess the progress that we have made, the mistakes that we have made, and learn from our lessons as we forge ahead to reposition our languages as languages of commerce, intellectual thinking, social justice in the digital era. With those words, I acknowledge again our chairperson, Professor Hlongwa. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and may you have a wonderful conference. Thank you.
Siyabonga kakhulu kukhabazela. Let's give Prof Mkhize a big round of applause, colleagues. Now you can be comfortable. This is Durban. Now take out those jackets. It's no longer cold. Take out those jackets. Feel at home. Sesamgelegile. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Kabazela. Colleagues, without further ado, may I now request our chairperson of ALASA, Dr. Nyofolo Malete. I don't normally use his first name, but since it is here in the program, I have a privilege of calling him and also using his name. A big round of applause for our chairperson as he makes his way to give us his welcome address. Yalebogang Ntate.
Program director, yeah, that name was given to me by my grandma. Yeah. And when I was 16 years old, I was brave enough to ask her why. And he explained there is a game that is played when the two families come to negotiations with regard to marriage. And my grandmother at that time, my grandfather has passed on, and he had to drive the cattle alone. Now there's this game of mocking one another. We know even our maiden songs, that is also a practice. I know of the other one of Skulu Patasenono Senkagai. You know, you have a beautiful bride and someone come and sing and say, where did you take these 2 days? but in actual fact, it is in a loving mood. Now, the family then chased my grandmother's cows to say they are so lean. And then when I was born, he said, "Ay, so that is the history, where the history comes from. Now, when I was growing up, attending the church, and the minister of religion said, and my colleagues would say, yeah, your name. Program director, the vice chancellor and principal, in his absentia, Professor Poku, the deputy vice chancellor, Professor Ntantla Mkize, honorable MECs who are here, PanSALB CEO, Professor Lance Schulz, the executive director, Mr. Dantile, the chairperson of COPAL, Professor Hlongwa, the CEO of SADILA, Professor Langakumalo, the CEO, and the chairperson of the steering committee of SADILA, Professor Masuha, who is also the Dean of Humanities of the University of the Free State. That's my boss. The conference sponsors, representatives, the conference sponsors here present, colleagues in the academic fraternity, members of the association, our students, ladies and gentlemen, ke a le dumedisa. Sanibonani, molweni. I can go so far. Ahe. The Machole. I'm learning. Program director, I want to take this opportunity to greet everyone on behalf of the African Languages Association of the Southern Africa, ALASA, and the board. This year, I just want to mention that with almost a week-long event, we mark the 25th biennial international conference, which is hosted by the University of KwaZulu-Natal. We are grateful about that. Allow me to convey our heartfelt appreciation to the University Management Conference Organizing Committee, especially you, Dr. Nzele. I think you and your committee have done an excellent job. I'm just wondering what will be the challenge of the next host. We are very grateful and humbled to be given a stage where each participant will have a role to play, allowing us to discuss a variety of issues of interest, particularly given the wide range of titles that we have in our program. I would like to welcome and recognize our official sponsors here present, a special PanSALB, ladies and gentlemen, the National Institute of Humanities and Social Sciences via Africa, the Department of Science and Technology, the South African Center for Digital Language Resources, SADILA, Shutter and Shooter, as well as the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Let me take this opportunity to welcome all delegates in attendance, all ALASA members, the board, and everybody to this auspicious event. We also have keynote speakers who will feature strong and relevant talks from our distinguished keynote speakers. It gives me a great pleasure to welcome in our midst Professor Ma in her absentia, Professor Pamela Maseko from the University of Nelson Mandela, Professor Leketi Makalela from WITS, Professor Omari from Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, Dr. Hloniphani Ndebele from the University of the Free State, and Dr. Cynthia Stella Kumalo from the Department of Arts and Culture. Program Director, we have a theme, and the theme of our 25th ALASA conference says, reimagining the role of African languages for social justice and transformation in the digital age. And this theme is in line with the 21st century educational mandate and Africa's obligation. UNESCO have a theme that says, educate an African feed for the 21st century. Program Director, with these themes, we are proud to indicate to everyone here present that the book project that culminated in the publication of 4 books speaks to the above-mentioned themes. We are therefore grateful to PanSALB for really making this a success, because they have sponsored the production of 2 books in particular. We hope that with the papers that will be presented during the conference will resonate well with the ALASA and UNESCO themes, which is educate an African and prepare the African for the 21st century. Program Director, allow me to plead with the members of the association to strive to adhere and to embrace the following Ubuntu principles and values, which is to respect the dignity of others and fellow citizens, to embrace positive group solidarity, to embrace the spirit of teamwork, and be of service to their fellow compatriots, to acknowledge the spirit of interdependence, and, Program Director, to never mock nor scorn the fallen compatriots. And they must never belittle the authority of our own. On behalf of the ALASA board, I would like to welcome you all, as Professor Hlonga have alluded, to lay down your arms and take off your armor, stable your horses, and join us in our vibrant discussions, and to drink from the well of African knowledge and feel at home. Program Director, allow me to make this metaphor, now that ALASA have reached this stage where I would equate it with one of the folk tales known as Nonyana Sinyamafi. Now that we have embarked on the process where we will be taking some of your well-written papers to produce the books that will also serve the demands and the mandate of the African continent, we think ALASA is now Nonyana Sinyamafi, the bird that spit gold. And it says, Nkopeleng ke bine gaupe, le kwana mo ke tswang ke bine gaupe. Nkopeleng ke bine gaupe, le kwana mo ke yang ke bine gaupe. Skobatela sa letlama, kobatela sa ga le tshabisa tlake, letlama a le betswa la lerothole le a dinama. E ne ba o bone mabekebeke. Ha o bone o bone mabekebeke. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Let's give our Chairperson another big round of applause. Awu, uma esesamukela ngesuthu bakithi. Awu, kodwa ungabikho multilingual as I wish. Ngaba sengiyabuwa manje. Sengimbonga ngesuthu. Awu. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Malete. Ladies and gentlemen, we have been joined by our Executive Director for Corporate Relations, Ms. Noma Zondo, from the University of KwaZulu-Natal. We do welcome you, Ms. Zondo. Thank you very much, colleagues. Colleagues, we have now reached the stage where we're now about to receive our first keynote presenter. And allow me, ladies and gentlemen, to introduce my sister and a professor, Professor Pamela Masego. Before I read what is actually presented here, we come a long way with Prof. Masego in the activist work of promoting African languages in our higher education institutions. We worked on one of our earlier projects on promoting multilingualism, which was funded by the Norwegians, which was called Centered. And that is where Prof. Mkize as well was part and parcel of that project as a psychologist, so came from the side of psychology. And actually, it was one of those projects that has given birth to many of the directorates that you see in your universities right now, the Centered project. Now, going through what is presented in your program, I'm not going to read all of it because we want to hear what she's going to share with us, but I will be very brief. Prof. Masego is currently the Executive Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and a Professor of the Sociolinguistics at the Nelson Mandela University. She's a social scientist. Her research interests are in historical sociolinguistics of African, I'm not going to read everything that is in bracket there, and also applied linguistics with a focus on language planning and on language policy and planning. Professor Masego has extensive experience of higher education sector in South Africa. She has over 30 years experience as an academic at various higher education institutions in South Africa, having worked at the University of Cape Town, Rhodes University, UCC, Northwest, you name them. So all of those universities. So she has also been awarded research fellowship in universities both locally and abroad. Prof. Masego has authored DHET 2015 Ministerial Report on the Use of African Languages as a Medium of Instruction in Higher Education, which influenced the revision of the 2002 Language Policy in Higher Education. She was also a member of the team that worked on the development of the 2020 Language Policy Framework for Higher Education institutions. You will read the rest, but I'm going to read the last. Usolwazi wethu, ugqirha lwazi lwethu la. She was brought up by her grandmother in a village called Ngqorho, eNgcobo. Intokazi yaseNgcobo le. Where she attended primary school before she went on to study at Clarksbury Secondary School at Mount Arthur's Girls' School, both mission schools in eNgcobo and Qaqadu, respectively. Ngicela simphe elikhulu ihlombe uSolwazi ugqirha Lwazi uMasego.
Let me start off by acknowledging the Deputy Vice-Chancellor and heads of the College of Humanities, Professor Nhlanhla Mkize, and then the chairperson of the board of the African Language Association of Southern Africa, Professor Elias Malete, and the rest of the board members. I wish to single out Professor Nobuhle Hlongwa, my sister, our host today. There's quite a few names that I hope I call out everyone important here. I want to acknowledge the government representatives here, the CEO of PanSALB, Mr. Lance Schultz, Dr. Lance Schultz, and the chairperson of the board, Professor Loli Mahobu Badenhorst. The local organizing committee, I want to acknowledge the chairperson. I'm told that she's the youngest person the conference has ever had, Sanele Nsele. Other keynote speakers today and for the duration of the conference, Professors Makalela, Chepange, Ashuma, and Drs. Ndebele and Kumalo. In my role as Dean, I'm a member of the South African Humanities Deans Association, and we've got, if you allow me, I want to acknowledge the deans I've seen here today, Professor Khala and Professor Masocha, who is the Vice President of the association. I wish to also acknowledge all the colleagues I've worked with over the years as a member of the association, the stalwarts of ALASA who never miss a conference. Distinguished guests, I thank you all for coming today, this morning, to listen to this keynote address, and good morning. The 2024 ALASA conference the theme is reimagining the role of African languages for social justice and transformation in the digital age. It is requiring us to pause, as indicated by Prof. Mkhize here, and reflect meaningfully on our knowledge production processes in the African Academy, and to present intervention strategies in response to extractivist epistemologies that have dominated the African Academy for centuries now. And we need to move towards more equitable practices that promote social justice, inclusivity, and the sustainability of diverse knowledge systems in the academy. In this presentation, I wish to reflect on the effects of extractivist epistemologies on practices of knowing of the indigenous peoples in the continent, and focusing in the Eastern Cape area where I do my research. And these epistemologies that are extractivist are both intellectual and material, but I want to focus more on the intellectual part of it. And these have been perpetuated for centuries through colonialism, imperialism, and to some extent, apartheid. Extractivist epistemologies refers to modes of knowledge production and dissemination that treat knowledge from indigenous population, say from marginalized and indigenous communities, as a resource to be extracted, often without proper recognition, consent, or compensation to the knowledge holders. To illustrate this point, I use the ephemeral or what they call short-lived literary productions of early African intellectuals who produced a variety of texts in isiXhosa in the Eastern Cape region of South Africa, and literary productions that showed refined knowledge systems of the African people in the region before the Western invasion of the continent. The texts, written primarily in isiXhosa and dealing with different topics of natural and social sciences, are a response to common debates that we as African language scholars often put as hindrances for the use of African languages for learning and teaching, or for presenting texts in African languages in different subject fields. So because the conference theme, or the ALASA, primarily is language, so I've got to talk briefly about language. Language matters in Africa, and South Africa specifically. I often imagine as having that genesis with the entry of European languages from the 1600s. So we often speak about African languages in relation, in the context of South Africa, in relation to Afrikaans English, and we never talk about them in isolation, especially when we talk about multilingualism. So multilingualism is therefore often historicized from the perspectives of languages of European origin, interacting with indigenous languages, even in post-apartheid policy provisions. There may be legitimacy to that, but this kind of historicization often perpetuates an ahistorical misrepresentation of Africa as a place of rudimentary languages with no capacity to use its own languages to mediate learning. And it often leads, therefore, to destruction and the erasure of history, of languages, of knowledges of the people of the continent. I just want to talk about the three concepts: historicide, linguisticide, and epistemicide. Historicide, obviously, is the erasure, destruction, marginalization of history. Linguisticide, the marginalization, erasure of language, and epistemicide is the same, but for knowledge systems. So this nexus encapsulates profound assaults on African identity. So because I don't know myself through my language, therefore, there is death in that aspect. There is death in the history that represents that and knowledges. And the deliberate obliteration of history, suppression of indigenous languages, and marginalization of traditional knowledge forms a triad of violent disregard for Africa as a place or a source of knowledge. It not only distorts historical narratives, but also hinders the transmission of African ways of knowing. And this comes from us also as scholars of African languages, not other people, obviously, because it has been presented to us through education that conditions us to think in a certain way about Africa. So therefore, I think it's a call to myself to recognize and address this triad of subjugation, and it's imperative for the reclamation and revitalization of Africa's rich knowledge and linguistic heritage, which we've come to know now, even if it's in rudimentary ways. I want to make reference to work of Kathleen Yuch, who writes extensively now in response to this notion that Africa is a dark continent, and traces the history of the continent way, way, way before Christ. And so obviously, Prof. Mkhize talked about Africa as a place, as a cradle of humankind, and therefore a cradle of language, a cradle of innovation, a cradle of invention. We know not far from here, in the continent, in Gauteng, the cradle of humankind, where we can see evidence of early life and early innovation and invention in Africa. And this goes all the way to the north. We know about the Timbuktu and everything that we know of Africa. And my agitation with how I teach and how we teach in the continent is that even though we are aware of these, but we hesitate to use them when we're teaching. Primarily, perhaps because we have not been conditioned, like I said earlier, we've not been conditioned to use ourselves, our knowledge systems, as legitimate ways that we can use to influence how our students think, and therefore how our society thinks about self. And also, because these are not easily accessible. So that's a challenge. So Hugh, in her 2022 writing, argues that it was the invention of language that permitted African people to migrate across the continent. And they were not communicating with each other in one language. They were communicating in multiple languages. So multilingualism, before Europe invaded Africa, was in existence in the continent. And so, and she goes on to say, Africa was subjected to several centuries of ahistorical misrepresentations as a place of darkness without literacy, without scholarship, while simultaneously subjected to plunder and intellectual theft, which is this extractivist epistemology I'm talking about. Therefore, the consequence is disruption of centuries of scholarship in mathematics, in philosophy and science. And Kathleen Joch has got evidence of how mathematics was done in Africa, how, I forget now, the compass was used in Africa to calculate the distance between the earth and the sun. That was before we know things as we know now, medicine and all that. So this disruption has occurred alongside linguistic and epistemological erasure, resulting in appropriation, denial, and invisibilization of Africa's contribution to humanity. Then I'm going to move to the archive, which is what I want to present today as a possible option for us to think about when we disrupt this hegemony of Western epistemologies. So there's a growing academic discourse on the role of the African archive in the understanding and reclamation of the African episteme that has been undervalued through deliberate epistemic erasure enabled by the ideologies of the empire. So the value of the archive is manifold, but I want to just highlight the three. It's a record of collective memory of society. It's the primary source of the archive in this context. I'm talking specifically about the African Literary Archive. In this case, there are early African thinkers writing in indigenous languages and from an African perspective. And so, lastly, because of the shifts that have occurred in our thinking and how we've been indoctrinated to think in a specific way, with the literary archive, we're able to exhume meanings from the words or the lexicon of the words and to go back and make assumptions about what the past was like. And so with this contribution, I provide insights on the value of the African language archive in the reconstruction of memory through African historiography from an African perspective, and the potential of the archive in diversifying and transforming the academic canon, because this is not a nice to do thing. We want it to influence what we teach and how we teach. And so, and in the context of my university, where as a Faculty of Humanities, we've been given a directive to revitalize the humanities in the academy, this archive has been used in that process of the revitalization of the humanities. And then just quickly, in Mandela University, we've been tasked, and maybe I'll say Mandela University because this is where I'm located now, but the history of this project goes a long way. UCT, when I was there, and then it was much more intense when I was at Rhodes University, and then now at Nelson Mandela University. And at Nelson Mandela University, like I say, it is enabled by the inaugural address of the Vice-Chancellor, where, as a vision of the university, she says the value of the archive enable us to memorialize the past and make sense of, situate the present and imagine where we're going. Okay, I think I've summarized that slide. For those people who don't know, isiXhosa is a language. The archive that I'm working with is written in isiXhosa, and for those people who are not from South Africa, the isiXhosa is concentrated in this area, and my university is here in Port Elizabeth, and it is spread out across the country. It's one of the widely distributed languages in the continent. Just before I go into the archive, I just want to talk briefly about the codification of isiXhosa, that was converting it from an oral language before the arrival of the missionaries, and then into it being a written language. I'm going to be quick on this because we know the history of the writing. But what I want to emphasize in this part of the presentation is that where we see ourselves now as African language, and I'm using African languages, I'm using isiXhosa as an example, but this could be said for any African languages. We see our languages as devalued, as not usable in scientific discourse, in politics, in education, economy, and what have you. But when the missionaries came here, they were in awe of the sophistication of African languages. And where we find ourselves now is a systematic process of de-evaluation and de-intellectualization of African languages. And so only if we can go back and recall those texts that were written at the point of entry of literacy in the country, we'll be able to tell that these languages were sophisticated. And Apriyat, writing in 1850, you know, Apriyat is one of those missionaries that worked in the continent, and especially in South Africa. He writes that in all grammatical form, in all grammatical variation of form, isiXhosa, and where I've put isiXhosa in brackets, they've used the K word, cafe, referring to isiXhosa. It is eminently distinguished by system and regularity. It is correctly spoken by all classes of the community, which is not the case, perhaps, with any of our European tongues. And this is an admission and articulation made by a missionary about our languages about 2 centuries ago. So, and Holden, who's quoted in Mostert, writes that isiXhosa oral tradition in debates demonstrates gift of logic. They have tenacious memory and nothing escapes their keen observation, and when knowledge is engraved in the tablet of their memory, it is never obliterated. And Meinhof writes that whoever wants to gain an intimate knowledge of the native will best do it by studying the fruits of his intellect, those productions which serve for the education of both the young and old, wherein his soul expresses itself unstifled by foreign intrusion. And then this is followed immediately by what do you call it? When you fight something, it's basically an onslaught of African languages. When missionaries have been so much in awe, and so when they realize that their agenda of converting the natives into Christianity, then they write in newspapers. There is very little in old Cafetom worth preserving. And we think it will be the wisdom of the natives as soon as possible to move forward into the day and secure the blessings which the present time brings to them. So this is not even 10 years after this articulation. I want to skip that and talk about the genesis, let me say the recognition of this archive. I use in my work newspapers written in the 19th century, from about 1880 up to about 1940. And we know the newspapers, they are ephemeral, they're short-lived. There's a turn of a newspaper is published today, and then tomorrow there's another version, and then you forget. So I use these newspapers, and we use it because at the time, the production of literature was preserved for school education, for church, and evangelization only. So, and these people start writing adult literature, but in newspapers, so that they escape the kind of censorship that the formal publications were subjected to. And they write intensely. So they don't write one contribution in one news. They write, people like Ziko, they write consistently for a period of 10 years. The people we know the most in the academy, at least Xhosa scholars, S.E.K. Mqhayi, we know those formal publications that have been presented as school texts. But now we know that Mqhayi has written much more than that. What we see in school is just a fraction of what Mqhayi was able to produce over the years. And it is A.C. Jordan who recognizes the activity, the literary activity of African scholars. And he states that any Bantu-speaking African in his own language in South Africa, she says that, or is the first to identify the earliest intensive literary productions by any Bantu-speaking African in his own language in South Africa. And these, like I say, they're written in periodicals and so forth. And the writings themselves cover events of local, national, and global scale, not just national only. And they reflect on the extent to which the Western value system impinge on local value systems and condemning the manner in which local population succumb to destructive Western value systems. And all of them, with the introduction, almost with no exception, with the introduction of the Bible and Christianity, they highlight the importance and appreciation of the Bible and Christian Western values, but also condemn it as an agent of cultural and linguistic dispossession. I don't know how to remove this. Okay. So, in conferences like this, I do want to acknowledge Jeff Oplander. Oplander is a person who has initiated the activity around showcasing and publishing these works. But Opland did not do it on his own. He did it with Xhosa-speaking intellectuals, or Phyllis Nandala Jordan, Abna Nyamende, Koliswa Moropa, many others, Untombomzi, Untosh Mazwi, who is amongst us, but I can't see her now with the recent publication. So he did not do it on his own. He did it. It was not possible. He did it with a lot of other intellectuals. And this work led not only to identification of more unpublished ephemeral literary texts from known writers such as Mqhayi, but also it led to discovery of other unknown yet prolific writers, amongst them a woman known as Nontsizi Mgqwetho, who, those people know English literature, has been dubbed the Olive Schreiner of isiXhosa. Those people know Craddock and Olive Schreiner. So Opland houses the Opland collection of Xhosa literature. And the process of republication of these works has been enabled through the support of the National Institute for the Humanities in collaboration with the UKZN Press, Prof. Hlongwa. When you look at the archives, let me say any writings, especially those where white scholars are projected in front, they are placed in front. But if you look behind them, even Prof. Kwacha, with the systematic codification of isiXhosa. We often put Beni as the person who invented the codification of isiXhosa. But Beni did not work by himself. I think it's high time as scholars of African languages that we start looking for those unknown natives. They were called, I mean, it would be, Beni was assisted by a man from the village of so-and-so, Godfrey was such. So these nameless people, they've got names. So I think it's high time, if we are resuscitating and giving authority to African ways of knowing, I think we must start just acknowledging those people that existed and enabled us to be where we are today in terms of our writing. And I've just highlighted here some of them. And we know Harold Schwab quite a lot, and God bless him. He's published these in Tsomi and so forth in e-repository. But she worked with women, mostly it were women who worked with these people in giving folktales and so. So I think we need to just acknowledge those people. I'm just going to scan through this quickly. I just want, now in isiXhosa we have one monthly, if I'm not mistaken, newspaper, and we may have one or two community newspapers, but we don't have formal newspapers. I just want to give an illustration of how much newspaper, to say African journalism, existed in the 1800s. And one has to stop and really ponder about what may have been the cause of this pause, this erosion, or the end of. So the first newspaper was in 1835, and I'm just giving just the covers or pages that are visible. And then also, I just want to also give an illustration of the kinds of archive we're working with, especially in the context of fragility of the archive. So in 1837, umthetheli isibutho samavo isithunywa senyanga indaba isigidimi which had got an English version, Cafe Express, Imvo Zabantsundu, which is one of the newspapers that had a long life in isiXhosa. We've got Bantu Batu, a multilingual newspaper, and umthetheli wabantu, and then Bantu World. So these are just some of the newspapers that existed at the time and which we used to extract the texts that were known. Just before I go to the actual work, I just want to talk about the contestation of the canon. We are doing this work with the purpose of presenting an alternative canon alongside the Western canon. But I want to emphasize, even at this point, that even as we are doing that, in our choice of who we publish or not publish, it's informed by our ideologies as researchers, who we know, who we don't know, and even in that process, we are in the process of marginalization of others. And I've been really conscious in this process about how little women we have come to identify. And we know that there were women who wrote, like your Mkwete, your Maxeke Griffiths, Maxeke Noni Jabavu, who wrote much later in the 1960s. So there are many others. So I just thought that I should just raise that. And for purposes of just diversity of languages and perhaps for me to get authority of or acknowledgement from my colleagues Abangamazulu, the one important scholar, Umazisi Kunene, Umazisi Kunene is one person who wrote, it's even, I can't even remember now the isiZulu title of the text, but which later was published as the anthem of the decade. And that text, he wanted it published. He wrote in isiZulu. It's a wonderful text of the cosmology of isiZulu and all that. And she could not get a publisher. And everybody said that you must translate it into English. And then succumbed to it. And I'm told now, I don't know how accurate that is, I'm told that the isiZulu text is nowhere to be found. Aye, we must talk. We must talk. But Mazisi Kunene, in the preface to the book, writes that, now the translation, writes that there is a need to challenge assumptions, placing African thought system just as folk thought, meriting no serious classification in the hierarchy of knowledge in the academy. And that was in 1945. And many have written way before that on matters that we think now are new in the academy. When we talk about coloniality and talking against that, we often make reference to Rhodes Must Fall and Fees Must Fall movement. And yet these people write in the 1800s already about these works. And I have to quote Umkai because he's much more explicit, Prof. Mkhize, about why we have to do what we're doing now, almost 100 years later after he wrote. He says that in his book of Ityala Lamawele, he says, I have insights that law in Xhosa-speaking society is not different at all from that of enlightened countries. Says the language and the cultural practices of AmaXhosa are gradually disappearing because of the word. And he says, yindawo yomlisela nomthinjana wasemaXhoseni ukuba ukhangele ngokucokisekileyo ukuba iyakuthi yakutshonela iphele lentetho nale mikhwa inesidima yako kwethu kutshonele nantoni na enye emveni koko. And this is where we found ourselves now, unfortunately. And then she says that ke ngoko la ngamazwembezwembe okuzama ukuxhathalaza kulomsinga uza kutshayela isizwe siphela zamani ukuxhasa nani ngeleno icala. A plea to us to do something about this. So just to talk about the texts themselves, I'm going to be quick. How much time do I have? So just to talk about the text, the writings were produced, as you can tell, from 18, the ones that I work with specifically from 1880 to 1940. And if you know the history of South Africa, you can realize how much must have been written during that time. So it's different political regimes from colonialism to apartheid, okay? So in that area where my research is based, it was a place where there was the longest brutal conflict in the history of South Africa, 100-year frontier wars. And then there was cattle killing, 1856, that is often attributed to Nongqawuse. And then Industrial Revolution, the rush for the diamonds in Kimberley, gold, and so forth. And then the South African Anglo-Boer War of 1899 to 1902, the establishment of the Union in 1910, intense and resolute black resistance when black people realized the need for them to claim human rights and fight against political and other forms of dispossessions. So these are written during that time. 1913 Land Act, and we've got authors writing extensively about what this means for Black society. Obviously, again, 1914 to 1918, and 1939 to 1945, all the land, the world wars. The emerging themes that are coming now is that there is intensive writing on the language, because in the process of the writing of the conversion of isiXhosa into print, the people are writing, contesting how words are codified, the sound system, how it does not align with how words are articulated. There's a wide contestation around that. The translation of the Bible, how made up translations are. And then this other one, Tsiko, who I'm going to make reference later on, says that if you want to understand how people speak, as a translator, you need to go to where people use the language. It says that if you want to understand the translation of the Bible, you must go to izikhungo, where people pray, and people don't only pray at church. And that makes the point that those people who don't believe in your church doesn't mean that they don't pray. So you must go listen to how they pray so that you can find equivalents that are not going to be insulting or not belong to the language itself. So the culture and the history, historical accounts, the 18th to 20th century African politics, global politics, botany, there is an extensive, extensive texts. Some of them have not been published yet in formal publications, medicinal plants and IKS, zoology, specifically ornithology, and Godfrey, who I'm also going to make reference to, writes extensively about bird science or ornithology. And of course, the epidemics in South Africa. When we're grappling with what is this thing that we've just had now? COVID-19. We have writings on these people, on how people have, what's the right word? How they responded to epidemics in a way where community does not die extensively. I'm gonna rush here. I just want to talk briefly about then the process of publishing this. We identify texts, and as I said, that Prof. Jeff Opland has got the primary library that we use as a primary source. And it doesn't end there, because sometimes Prof. Opland has got one text that makes reference to many other texts that he would not have in his library. So it means that then we have to go to to other libraries, South African libraries, as well as libraries abroad. You'll be surprised at how much libraries abroad carry of the African Literary Archive. So most of the things that may be folded incorrectly in South African libraries and that have been copied through that microfilm, they're often reproduced as such. But when you go to libraries in Soweto, for instance, or in churches in the UK, you see well-preserved texts. And so we look at that. And then we establish the authenticity of the text. Someone like Jonas Ntsiko, for instance, signs off as Jonas Ntsiko sometimes, as JN sometimes, as Uhati Waseluhlangeni sometimes. And you've got to establish that all these people are the same people, and you've got to do that in a variety of ways, one of which would be to have to look at the style of writing of the people and see that it is consistent. So you don't put Ntsiko's works in same Kai or Kopa's works. Okay, and then depending on, so we annotate the text, We transcribe them, translate them into English, and this is just an example of what we do, just systematically. This, number one, is the text as we get it. Number two is a translation. Number three is the annotation, because we've got to contextualize the production of the text. We contextualize it within the politics, whatever, and then the book comes out in this volume. And I just thought, out of interest here, we hear about the sour bill, and then we often hear it from a white perspective on what they've written about it. And here, Ntiko write extensively about how people should respond. If you, as a historian, political science student, sour bill is that bill that divided South Africa into 87% and 13% and 13% for black people. And so there's very little, if you look at that, there's very little written from a black perspective. And these texts present that. Okay, I've got very, now we've got 10 volumes, and I must say I can't see Ndosh, the last volume, is Ndosh? Okay, hi Ndosh. This volume has been published in collaboration with Ndosh Mazwi as part of her PhD thesis. I want to sample text, Prof, and then I sit down. Wellington Kopa, one person who is so conscious about the power of literacy and knowledge and archiving. And he says in one of the texts, imbali yethu asikuko nokuba ndenga ingaziwa kakuhle ishicilelwe kuba zonke izizwe ezinembali ziba zihlela zifile noko sukuba sizichithakele. Sifundiswa ngembali zezizwe zaseGreece, Rome, Egypt nezamangesi njalo njalo. Into ezazizizo kwanento eziyiyo namhla ke ngoko ziphilile kuba nathi singazange sizibone sazi into ngazo. Namhla ngenxa yeencwadi zembali zazo siyazibona, siyathetha nazo, no? Siyazekela nentetho nemikhwa ethile kuzo kubume banamhla bazo. Okay? And then one of my favorites, Solilo, and I'm just quick, I'm not going to read the biography of them. It says, Malunga nabafundi abamhlophe, u-MP siyamthelela, abalunyusi uhlanga, ewe bayathanda ukuba malunyuke liyezulwini, kona ukuba malube nobuhlanga balo, nokuba maluqabukele amalungelo alo, akunjalo njengokuba sibona. And then, quickly, I've already quoted Mkai, and then the one thing I just want to note about Mkai, I hope someone is going to say they've got the book. We are told that uSamson, which is the first novel in African language, in isiXhosa, which was published in 1907, is lost, is no. So anyone has the book? I'm looking at UCT. uSamson. So it's nowhere. It is catalogued at Kore Library. There is an indication that it was at Rhodes University at some point, but it is not in the shelves now. So this is what a resource, an archive that is lost now, and we don't know. We included Godfrey, and is going to be my second last author that I make reference to. Because Godfrey is a lexicographer, Dion, as you know, and in one of, and he makes huge contributions in the Cafe English Dictionary, and the entries mostly are scientific entries on bird science and so forth. And then I think for us saying that the science of the language is not a level where it should be used, he makes a point that there is no lack of isiXhosa bed law. Okay, bed law, obviously we know the anthropological aspects of things. But much remains to be gathered and assorted. Hitherto, the difficulty in the way of students of native bed law has been in finding the scientific synonyms. So the synonyms, the words exist in isiXhosa, but the scientific synonyms in English needs to be found, okay? And then it says opportunities of getting this are boundless. There's no reason for us not to do that. Tsiko is also one of my, okay, I've already quoted this. And 2 minutes, Prof of the premise. I just want, the call for us to restore the archive, to appraise the archive. I just want to also, especially those people who are interested in restoration, preservation, and so forth, I just want to give an indication of how the sites of literary productions look now. Where there is a dark area there, this is where the first words of isiXhosa were produced, and this is the Kume Valley. This is where Benny Ross brought that machine from Scotland and printed this. And now it's impenetrable, it's bushes only, you can't see. If you force yourself between the bushes, you see areas that look like a kitchen, you see graves. Those people know Kyali, the grave of Kyali is there, and of course other graves of the missionaries. The publisher that published most of these works that we talk about now is the Lovedale Press. This is one of the machines that produce these journals. It's in a state of disrepair. The books are put carelessly in the archive, actually in the library. Actually, the place which was used as Lovedale Press after the fire in the frontier wars, the place which was Lovedale Press is now used as a morgue, by the way, which is very sad. And some of the places where the first Bible was written, Mount Coke, for those people who know this area, this is how they look like now. I may be, once again, saying this about isiXhosa, but it's something that is reflective of most of our African languages. I think I want to end off by just reading the second last point. What we're doing in terms of responding to coloniality and this extractivist epistemologies, it requires us to be disobedient to colonial and other ideologies that frame our ways of knowledge production in the academy. It requires us to do the most difficult thing, which is to learn, to unlearn the privilege of schooling in order for us to relearn and acknowledge ourselves. Thank you very much.
Prof. Let's give Prof. Masego another big round of applause. Prof, before you go, please don't go away. As a way of appreciation, Prof. Masego, we request our Executive Director, Corporate Relations, Ms. Nomazondo, to say siyabonga. Enkosi, Prof. Riyalebuga. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, colleagues. Tomorrow, don't miss the precursor to our gala dinner, the book launch. Don't miss it, please. That is going to be our cocktail and a book launch. And what is interesting, colleagues, with the book launch is that a number of presentations that were made at UCC are now published in those books that are funded by Pan South African Languages Board. So thank you very much, Prof. Masego, for sharing with us the importance of those archives, the importance of those early writers, and acknowledging their contribution to the knowledge systems. Colleagues, thank you very much. May I now request our chairperson, our youngest chairperson, Dr. Sanele Nsele, to do some announcement before we break for tea. Ngiyabonga kakhulu.
A very good morning, colleagues. I thought UProf was going to do the announcement, but yeah, I'm going to do it anyway. Before I let UProf Zulu do the rest, I just need to make a few requests from you, colleagues. We have media houses who are present from today till the last day of this conference. So they have requested that we ask the following authors or presenters to provide their contact numbers so that they can interview them. This is regarding your presentations that you submitted. So they would like to conduct an interviews with the following authors. I'm going to read the titles where the names are not available. The first one is Hitting the Bull's Eye in African Languages. I think this is the keynote, one of the keynotes, so we'll sort that out. The second one is Exploring the Profound Interplay of Local Languages and Transformation to Facilitate Communication and Change in South Africa. The second one is Using isiZulu Interactive Explainer Videos in the Training of Psychologists in KwaZulu-Natal. The fourth one will be Izingqinamba esibhekene nothisha besiZulu ulimi lwesibili emaklasini amabanga aphezulu. The fifth one will be Exploring European Colonial Occupation of Bantu Languages. The sixth one is Exploring the Use of Linguistic Repertoires for isiXhosa speaking people on TikTok videos. And the last but not least is Empowering the Deaf for the Digital Age through Language Policies. May I kindly request that authors of this presentation report to the registration desk so that we can have their details. Thank you so much, colleagues.